One percenters, welcome back. Thinking basketball. Can this new tactic save weak defenders, aka Joker and Curry?
Nets the other day, and something really jumped out to me about how successful this late game possession was. But this wasn't about extra effort or.
I talked about it. The game has evolved so much. Offense is so good. Defense, you have to adopt new philosophies or switch it up. You can play 3.5 quarters one way, and then you have to change your schemes. So let's see if they've done something different.
Strategy designed to protect weak defenders, and I think it might have massive ramifications for playoff basketball.
Mismatch
For
hunting.
a long time, weak defenders were put on the worst score that they could reasonably defend.
Offensively, before it was mismatch hunting, and then other ways of attacking would be like dominating by like size, like you just throw it into the post. Right now, it's like shooting. You're trying to isolate pick and rolls and get the guys, and then now everybody's trying to switch everything. So versatility and speed. So you're winning on speed, get more possession, shoot better, stuff like that. So the game has kind of evolved that way in terms of offensive strategy.
For instance, Steve Nash would guard Derek Fisher, and that was his matchup for most of the game. He wouldn't have to worry about defending Kobe Bryant, except for maybe a cross match in transition.
When he got
But
dunked
in
on.
the last decade, we've seen more and more pick and roll, and to make it easier to guard that deadly action, more and more teams started switching, and that changed everything. Because it meant offenses could start targeting players by bringing them into the pick and roll and hunting the switch that the offense wanted. LeBron James was perhaps the first superstar to popularize this tactic, constantly going after a team's weakest defender like Steph.
And this is why when you say like one-on-one and guys say who would win one-on-one, you always pick the bigger, stronger guy, because if it's one-on-one, you just back the crap out of him. And the only way the only reason Shaq isn't the greatest player ever is because of the referees.
Curry in order to create a mismatch and attack. Attacking mismatches in pick and roll isn't just about smaller players, though. Nash targeted the Lakers' big men in 2010, and elite rim protectors are susceptible to severe cooking if they venture out against
Chef
elite
Curry
shooters and ball handlers. Even when defenses weren't switching, big men were vulnerable to pull-up threes from these shooters, so they've been dragged into pick and roll actions mercilessly if they can't move well in space. As targeting weaker defenders became more popular, defenses looked for ways to avoid these mismatches, which led to pre-switching, a tactic to avoid the pick and roll for a targeted player by switching away from the ball so another teammate run.
So when you add all these layers and complexities into defense, it gets confusing. And when the game gets tight, people forget assignments or you get caught up in the heat of the moment. Teams over time figure you out, pre-switch, zone, all these different things. In an ideal world, you can just lock up your own guy, but we know that never happens.
Runs into the screening action instead. In last year's finals, Boston also pre-switched to keep Rob Williams closer to the basket and away from Curry. Grant Williams is waiting for someone to set a screen, follows a screener, but that's a decoy, so Kevon Looney can escort Rob into the action. Only Grant reads it and switches into the pick and roll anyway. Having
Smart
versatile
Grant
defenders
Williams.
like this means there are no mismatches, and it ends up in a stop. Of course,
This is brains. Huge brains by
there
Grant
are
Williams.
counters to these counters. Here, Al Horford takes Rob's man, so Draymond Green sprints into the action to set a second pick, and Williams needs to come out because of Curry's shooting, and with Marcus Smart chasing him around the screen, Rob's actually able to block Curry's jumper. A second pick, and Williams needs...
Right, so if you actually watch a series over time, you can see all the adjustments by the coaches and by the players. A lot more credit has to go to the players for executing it live time, but the coaches have to put that idea in there.
needs to come out because of Curry's shooting, and with...
But you also have to allow for all these like illegal-ish screens.
Marcus Smart chasing him around the screen, Rob's actually able to block Curry's jumper,
Especially
which
with
is
the
a
Warriors.
great reminder that mismatches in basketball aren't 100% propositions. There's no such thing as a guaranteed bucket, and by looking for mismatches, teams are turning 40% attempts into 50 or 60% shots.
That's Curry,
Another
man.
way to force a mismatch is to have the target's man bring up the ball, pass it, and immediately go set the screen. This way, there's no one around for Curry to pre-switch with, and he has to join that pick and roll dance. So Golden State counters by double teaming, which forces a pass, and they recover to prevent any advantage. Even when a weaker defender is dragged into the pick and roll game, a hedge or hard show at the ball can avoid a switch. And the goal here is to slow the defender is dragged, it counters.
Okay, so Jaylen Brown, he's a little bit
which forces a
too eager to swing that ball, right?
pass,
So he doesn't drag the double team out, so
and
he
they
makes a
recover
little
to prevent
mistake
any
there.
Advantage. Even when a
Right, so you're giving the defense what they want.
weaker defender
This is 0-0 in the
is
game.
dragged into the pick and roll game, a hedge or hard show at the ball.
So right here, if Luka is in better shape or faster, he can just blow around these things
can avoid
instead of just picking it up kind of unnecessarily, right? But it is 0-0 in the game.
switch. And the goal here is to slow down the dribbler so the other defender can recover, avoiding any switch while minimizing the advantage of the screen. Because hedging or showing temporarily puts two defenders on the ball, it can still leave defenses exposed. So in order to plug that leak, there's yet another tactic that has emerged, which requires team-wide coordination and might just be an antidote to protect vulnerable defenders in the playoffs.
Hey,
You just have to set up different rules. You have to set up different rules. Typically, you want to stay between man and man ball and the rim. A lot of teams will force sideline. A lot of teams will force middle. A lot of teams will force left. So these are kind of like
The
basic
pick and roll has always
things.
been part of the NBA, and so has switching. Traditionally, switching was simple. If two defenders switched, they would guard each other's man. You take my guy, I take your guy. But more complicated switches have been around for decades, and the rise in switches involving multiple players is a key step in this tactical arms race. There's a ton going on here. Dallas wants to put Curry in the screening action. Steph pre-switches with Draymond to avoid it. So they just send up a second screener to drag Curry into the pick and roll. He hedges to avoid the switch, but instead of recovering to his man, Draymond rotates over and Steph peels out to Green's man, and all of a sudden there's no advantage. This kind of peel switch happens when a defender is recovering, a teammate helps, and instead of trying to catch up, he switches off to the helper's man. This has been around for a long time. Back in the 1988 finals, Dennis Rodman follows Magic Johnson around a screen. Then when help comes, he peels off to take away a would-be layup. Switching like this is so powerful because it quickly erases an offensive advantage. Here's a traditional approach where Philly traps the ball handler, so one defender sprints back to the paint while help contains the ball. Then that helper still has to sprint out to the corner. Playing things straight up like this can force weak side defenders to help in one direction, then turn and sprint back out to the perimeter. But the peel switch is far more economical. Curry's man slips back door, and when Klay Thompson helps, instead of recovering and then asking Klay to recover himself, Steph just peel switches directly to Klay's man, and the defense is completely reset. And even after a direct pass to the corner, the possession goes nowhere. Here's an example in pick and roll, where Curry shows himself in front of the ball, a teammate slides over to pick up the screener, so Curry peels off to take his man, and again there's no mismatch to hunt. This time they take it further, with Curry momentarily stopping the ball. The next defender over picks up the roll man, And as Curry recovers, Draymond slides up to the wing so Curry can peel all the way to the corner. And think about what's happened here. Curry can't recover faster than the ball to the roll man. He can't recover faster than Draymond to the opposite wing, but he can beat the ball to the opposite corner. We saw the Mavs use this last year to protect Luka Doncic, briefly hedging, with each defender shifting over to the next man as Luka just peeled off to the nearest opponent. And while there are different terms for this full team-wide rotation, I'm calling it the shift.
That's a good way to call it. I mean, you want versatile defenders, you want smart defenders. I talk about defense as discipline and deception.
Traditional approach, where the Raptors briefly double James Harden, but as the help comes to pick up the screener, that target.
See, so right here, you have to have smart offensive players to analyze what's going on right away. The ability to have one guy like James Harden, Curry suck everybody out, Luka, right? It's a 4-on-4, and then eventually 3-on-3. If you're trying to develop your game, you need to play more 3-on-3 and find all these weaknesses. The more players you add, the more complexity and layers get involved.
Doesn't peel off anywhere, instead trying to get back in front of his original man. So there's no shift, the defense is still compromised, and it's an easy dunk. Also note what happens.
But also you need 5 guys.
The nearest defender isn't there to meet the ball.
On the same page.
The next defender is vulnerable closing out to the corner, and the offense always stays one step ahead. We're also seeing this shift on straightforward double teams, where the next defender slides over, which triggers another short rotation behind him. And meanwhile, Chris Paul just peels off to the open man on the weak side, and there's no tax to pay for him guarding Luka. A traditional double team often involved a defender leaving his man, then recovering back out to that same player without extra rotations. Even more complex doubles from the weak side still saw defenders trying to recover back to their own man and avoid switching, whereas today teams aren't worried about a small guard switched onto Shaq in the post, so they just shift defenders around freely on the perimeter, making this tactic possible. It actually doesn't quite work as well with slow-footed big men helping. They double to protect Curry here. The Warriors shift everyone over, but Kevon Looney can't contain the ball, so it's a breakdown anyway. But when a big man like Nikola Jokic is on the ball, look at how economical this is. The double comes, everyone shifts one place for the Nuggets, and the original double teamer only has to recover back into the paint area. And that brings us back to the Nuggets and Jokic, who has traditionally been targeted in pick and roll in the playoffs because of his lack of mobility. Denver's typically had Jokic hedge to avoid switches, but that still creates a 4-on-3 away from the ball. But against Brooklyn, they just have him switch the pick and roll, then send a double team, which triggered the shift while Jokic comfortably peeled off into the paint, and that's where his size helps the most anyway, so this one worked out perfectly for the Nuggets. Coach Michael Malone's idea here is that, ironically, he nullifies the advantage of the screen by having Jokic switch, then protects him in isolation by sending a double, because the shift prevents an advantage while Jokic can recover to the nearest defender. Even when they bring Jokic back up again, he's looking to switch and peel off. Aaron Gordon's a little late to shift over, but it's wide right. Since Brooklyn had no big men in this lineup, Jokic doesn't even look to pre-switch here. He just chases Mikal Bridges outside the arc, the late double comes, the shift is on, and Jeff Green kills the pass, and it's a shot clock violation. Of course, this switch and shift tactic isn't a cure-all. It requires timely reads and reactions. Spencer Dinwiddie knows it's coming, so he dribbles backwards to get Jokic to peel off, then drives at Jokic to keep Jamal Murray behind him, and this defender probably needs to recover earlier out to the wing, but he's a little too late. Ultimately, there's probably no way to truly hide the weakest defender on a basketball court. defense is too coordinated and dependent on the weakest link. And of course, movement or better isolation players might attack Jokic or other defenders before that double team can even come.
Yep.
But
If you move the guy out the corner,
you'll
you'll have the whole side.
Shifts have become viable ways for defenses to protect their most vulnerable defenders out there. And I'm excited to see just how successful these tactics are in playoff basketball.
Ooh, I mean, it's a decent tactic. Once one team gets it, you all kind of do it. It'll just kind of go back to where it was. You won't need pick and rolls, and you just go isolation 1-on-1, put them on a side, clear out the side, and then it's 1-on-1. If you're trying to get a mismatch anyways, just walk that dude down, clear out the side, and then you just change your tactics from there. Where was it?
Weakest link. Probably no way to truly, or better, these team level rotational shifts have become viable ways for defenses to protect their most links.
See if I find that same clip.
To keep Jamal Murray reads and reactions. Spencer.
Okay, so right here, right? If you whoever is number one, get him out of the corner. You run Mikal Bridges out of the corner, and then you'll have the whole side for Dinwiddie to isolate against Joker, and then he can always go, right pound, step back, or whatever he's going to do on that side. There's an adjustment to the adjustment, and then you can always make an adjustment to the adjustment to the adjustment, or you can just go back to the original thing is just beat your defender, and you give him space to operate. But yeah, that's the cat and mouse game of basketball. Until next video, take 14 minutes, 24 seconds, or 1% of your day to get better. Peace.